This session is on the topic of assumptions and risk in project management. The sessions are designed for participants who have completed the Project Management for Development Professionals Level 1 course and passed the associated examination. The emphasis that is being made in this series on coaching is trying to move beyond just knowledge and understanding of the project management concepts and to get a transfer of learning, some kind of increased application within the workplace so that there can be an improvement in performance. At many points during these sessions, I'm going to have participation by people who are watching the video. I will pause after I ask for your participation. You can turn off and restart the video in order to give yourself time to do the exercises. You can do them yourself, or I would encourage them that you do them with a small group if possible. So the first question I want you to think about and answer is, how have you applied the Project Management for Development Professional PMD Pro Level 1 knowledge and tools in your work recently? It's important that you try to use the knowledge and especially the tools in your work, and that you get help in looking at what you've done to make sure that it's correct and to get suggestions for improvement. Assumptions. As part of what the PMD Pro Phase Model, what was previously called the Lifecycle, at what point do we begin to look at and try to understand assumptions? I assume that was an easy question for most of you because assumptions are a critical part of the logical framework, or the log frame, which is first done as part of the proposal in the project identification and design phase. There are also relationships between that phase and the assumptions that with the other phases in the model, and I'll be talking about those in this session today. We'd like to say that assumptions are the crux of the log frame. Now, what is crux? That may be a new word to some of you, so I looked up the definition. Here at the bottom, crux is derived from the Latin word meaning cross. It's a vital, basic, decisive, or pivotal point. So what we're saying is that assumptions are a vital, basic, decisive, and pivotal point of the log frame. Now, that's contrary to how I've observed that most people use assumptions in the log frame. A lot of times assumptions are something that are thrown in at the very end just to be compliant with what has to go into the log frame. But basically you're saying that if the outputs are achieved and the assumptions hold true, then they will significantly contribute to the outcomes. And especially in project management, we're concerned about the tangibles, or the lower half of the log frame, and that's why this particular cell is made red here. Now I'll talk a little bit about the logic of the log frame and about how assumptions complete the logic of the hierarchy of objectives. This column is a hierarchy of objectives, or a description of the intervention. It has a logic, and you can read the logic from the bottom up or from the top down, but it is a vertical logic. So you say, if you accomplish these objectives at the activity level, they will produce the outputs. If the outputs are produced, they will contribute to the outcomes. If the outcomes are produced, they'll contribute to the goal. Now that's not a complete logic. The vertical logic is essential, but it's not complete. You have to add the assumptions in order to make a complete logic in the log frame, and that requires a horizontal component. So it reads like this, and I'm starting at the output level because that's probably the most important level for having assumptions in project management. Outcomes are extremely important as well, but for project management, we're very much concerned about the tangible products and services that come out of it. So you read the vertical and horizontal logic combined in this way. You can say that if you produce all of the outputs and the assumptions at the output level hold true, then you will contribute significantly toward accomplishment of the outcomes. If the outcomes are accomplished and the assumptions at the outcome level hold true, then you will significantly contribute toward accomplishment of the goal. That's the combination of the vertical and the horizontal logic to complete the log frame. Assumptions are extremely important. All right, let me back up a little bit and ask you this question. What is an assumption? Please select the correct answer. Is an assumption A, something that's accepted as true? B, arrogance? C, part of a cause-effect relationship? Or D, expecting planned activities to produce results? Okay, I'm going to go through all four of these, A, B, C, D, one at a time. And A is a correct answer, that an assumption is something that you assume is going to happen, or you'll assume will be maintained in order for the objective at one level to accomplish what it needs to accomplish or contribute to what it needs to contribute to at the next level. So this is a true statement, and you can see I'm probably tricking you that you may have assumed that there's only one right answer. But an assumption can also be a sign of arrogance. Now, we hope that you can keep that to a minimum, but sometimes our assumptions can really get us in trouble because we're not being realistic, or we are assuming and thinking that we can do and accomplish a lot more than what we can in reality, or we're defying historically what has happened in the past and what could happen in the future. So I gave this one a thumbs up as true also. Definitely C is true, and of these three it's probably the most important, just like I explained on the previous slide, that assumptions are necessary to complete the cause and the effect relationship that's represented in the logic of the log frame. And finally, number D, letter D, it's probably even the most true of all four of these, that it's expecting the planned activities to produce results. So in other words, it's completing the logic of the results and the impacts that are expected from the project and the intervention. So in essence, I think you could say that all four of those were true. Now, what is the definition of assumption? I wanted to take a minute and just go back to the dictionary. The dictionary definition from the PMD Pro guide says that assumptions are hypotheses or ideas, or sometimes we say educated guesses about necessary conditions, both internal and external conditions, identified in a design to ensure that the presumed cause and effect relationships function as expected and that planned activities will produce expected results. And I underlined those particular parts because they line up with the answers that you were looking at in the previous question. The one that may not be there as much as the others is arrogance. So if there's any thumbs down answer here, it's probably B, but I gave it a thumbs up because more often than we like to believe there is arrogance that comes through in the planning process. As you can see in this picture here, which is a drop of water going into a pool, that act itself isn't that significant, but it creates then a ripple effect that will go throughout the whole pond, and assumptions are certainly analogous to that particular diagram. Now think about and answer this question: why are assumptions so important? First of all, they complete the logical flow of the project or the log frame. I hope I've made that point very clearly. Secondly, if the assumptions are weak, they force the improvement of the objectives and strengthening of the proposed project plan. So as you look at the assumptions in a log frame, it's a possibility that you might come to the conclusion that the objectives have to be changed because they're not logical, or because the assumptions that you came up with are killer assumptions, and you may need to either change the objectives or kill the project because they're going to be fatal, so likely to happen during the implementation that you better not go into the project without changing them. Thirdly, assumptions are the beginning of recognizing the risk that must be effectively managed. And I'll talk more about that when I get into the risk section, because that's one that I found people often don't think about, or they don't see the connection. And then finally, donors insist that their funds result in more than the tangible inputs, activities, and outputs. They want more than that. They want you to produce those outputs, but they want those outputs to result in broader, longer-term, and sustainable impacts. That's extremely important. Now, the next question: what are some of the assumptions in your work, in your projects? Of course, weather is very unpredictable. It is often a factor that we need to look at. Stability, both socially and politically, is extremely important. Having funding and making sure that funding is maintained over the period of a project as it was promised, especially in projects where you have commodities that you're producing, you really need stable markets. Markets can also affect inputs as well. Exchange rates are extremely important, especially where there's fluctuation because of inflation or even deflation. Participation is a huge matter, especially for NGOs in particular, because they want to ensure ownership and sustainability of their projects. Corruption is often an issue that needs to be faced in many places, and it has to be managed. The human resource side can be a big area. We have to assume that we can find qualified staff and that they can be hired under the terms that we've specified, and then retaining those staff for the period of the project. Working with partners, finding those partners, and then building or helping to strengthen their capacities and their own abilities to manage projects. Compatible rules and regulations are important, particularly those from government agencies. Then, especially for projects that involve capacity building and training, trying to assure that the learning will not just stay in the classroom, but that you will get transfer of learning and that you'll get a difference in performance. Leadership is extremely important, not just internally within your own project and with your own organizations, but at the donor level, and also at the recipient or stakeholder level. Then financial systems, and you can also talk about procurement, computers, fleets, and many other systems. Those are some of the assumptions that you probably mentioned.